who because of God keeps his sword sheathed until God says otherwise. And so in effect, I'm going to say this, you cannot be meek if you are weak. It requires strength, but that strength is under the control of Christ and God. That's what we're talking about. Meekness describes a yielded life to God, to his will and his purpose. And it is the opposite of being self-willed. The Hebrew word for meek means to be molded. It's a picture of putty that when put in God's hands is made into or fashioned into something that he desires. Now, there's two other things that I want to mention about meekness. One is that meekness is always contrasted with pride. It's what the Greeks call lofty-heartedness. And then secondly, meekness is always connected with gentleness. This means that meekness is really, like Aristotle said, that important middle ground between God and man. And that's going to be really important. It's going to be essential when we go to make application. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to say from the etymology, we could define meekness as an attitude of humility towards God and gentleness towards men that springs from a recognition that God is the creator and therefore he is in control. Now, I want to give you some examples of meekness from the scriptures. There are a lot of people that picture meekness, but I want to focus on two in particular. And the first would be my Old Testament example, and this would be Moses. In Numbers 12 and verse 3, the scriptures tell us that now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. So this is an attribute that Moses exemplified better than anyone else. So Moses was weak, right? He was meek. I'm going to get those two. Moses was meek, but he was anything but weak or cowardly. In fact, he was a very mighty man. He was a lawgiver. He was the one God used to build the nation of Israel, basically. You remember where Moses, he struck and killed an Egyptian who was mistreating his countrymen. And then early on, even before that happened, he fought against a band of shepherds who were not allowing Jethro's daughter to water the flocks. He interceded on their behalf. Moses' life was not characterized by a spineless, compromising, ineffective character. It was quite the opposite. He stood before Pharaoh and demanded, "Let my people go." At the Red Sea, he told the people of God, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." That's what Moses did. Moses was considered to be meek because his strength was channeled in the direction of a higher purpose. He had placed himself into the hands of God and therefore the will of God. Excuse me. Now, in the New Testament, there's no better example of what we're talking about than Jesus. Again, this is going to be one of those times where I'm going to quote this from the King James because every other translation will have a different word. But in Matthew 12, verses 28 to 29, Jesus said this. He said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Now here it is. "For I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls." Jesus is the perfect embodiment of every virtue. But here he is specifically telling us, drawing our attention, inviting us to learn of him. And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the meekness that he possessed. Now, this is pretty important here. The life of Jesus shows us the two sides to the nature of meekness. What do I mean? Well, before God and those who feared him, Jesus was considered to be the Lamb of God. He was gentle and loving, right? But on the other hand, before those who opposed God,